So in this video, I'll talk about the cosmogony that we can derive from Homer. There's not much of it, as you will see, and the idea of the rank of gods to some extent, or even the ancestry of God. Rather, rank of gods we already talked about, but the ancestry of gods, if any, that we could derive from the Iliad and the Odyssey. What I'll do is I'll read out from a translation of the Iliad by Robert Fitzgerald, this section from what is called the Deception of Zeus. I mean, you should read the whole thing. It's actually a very readable text. But in this one, Hera is trying to get Hypnos, sleep, to send Zeus to sleep, or well, to make him sleepy at the very least, right? So she sort of tries to convince him, saying, "Sleep, sovereign of gods and all mankind, if ever you gave heed to me before, comply again this time, and all my days I shall know well I am beholden. Lull to sleep for me the shining eyes of Zeus, as soon as I lie down with him in love. Then I shall make a gift to you, a noble, golden, eternal chair. My bandy-legged son Hephaestus, by his craft, will make it and fit it with a low footrest, while you may place your feet while taking wine." Right? So she tries to bribe him, saying, send Zeus to sleep. But mild, sweet sleep replied, "Most venerable goddess, daughter of Kronos, great of old, among the gods who never die, I might easily lull another to sleep. Yes, even the ebb and flow of cold Oceanus, the primal source of all that lives," right? And we'll come back to this idea of Oceanus as a primal source of all that lives. "But Zeus, son of Kronos? No, not I. I could not venture near him, much less lull him. One other time you taught me something, giving me a mission when Heracles, the prodigious son of Zeus, had plundered Ilium and come away. That day indeed I cast my spell on the father's heart. I drifted dim about him, while you prepared rough sailing for the hero. In the open sea you stirred a gale that drove Heracles on Kos Island far from friends. Then Zeus woke up and fell into a fury and hurled the gods about his hall in quest of me above all. Out of heaven's air into deep sea, to be invisible forever, he would have plunged me. Had not night preserved me, Nyx that is, all-subduing night, mistress of God and men. I fled to her, and he for all his rage drew back, for fear of doing a displeasure to swift night. A second time you asked me to perform something I may not. But to this she answered, why must you dwell on that unhappy day? Can you believe that Zeus, who views the wide world, will be as furious in defense of Trojans as for his own son Heracles? No, no, come. I should add, my gift to you will be one of the younger graces for a mistress, ever to be called yours. Another bribe. In eager pleasure, Sleep said, swear by Styx, corroding water. Place one hand on earth, grassland of herds, and dip your other hand in dazzling sea. All gods with Kronos in the abyss attest that I shall marry one of the younger graces, Pasithea, the one I have desired all my living days. Bribe taken? Without demur, Hera, whose arms shone white as ivory, took oath as he demanded. Each by name she called on all the powers of the abyss, on all the Titans. Then, when she had sworn, these two departed in the air from Lemnos, putting on veils of cloud rack, lightly running towards Ida, mother of beasts and bright with springs. At Lectum promontory, from the sea they veered inland and upland. At their passage, treetops were in commotion underfoot, but Sleep soon halted and remained behind before he came in range of Zeus's eyes. He mounted a tall pine, the tallest one on Ida, grown through mist to pierce the sky. Amid the evergreen boughs he hid and clung, and seemed that mountain thrush of the clear tone, called Chalkis by the gods, by men Simenides. Hera swept onto Gargaron, Ida's crest, and there Zeus, lord of clouds, saw her arrive. He gazed at her, and as he gazed, desire veiled his mind like mist. as in those days when they had first slipped from the parents' eyes, to bed, to mingle by the hour in love. He stood before her now and said, "What brings you down from Olympus to this place? The chariot you ride is not in sight." The lady Hera answered him in guile, "I go my way to the bone of earth, to see Oceanus, or Oceanus in Greek, from whom the gods arose, and Mother Tethys. In their distant hall they nourished me and cared for me in childhood. Now I must see them and compose their strife. They live apart from one another's bed, estranged so long since anger came between them. As for my team, it stands at Ida's base, ready to take me over earth and sea. On your account, I came to see you first, so that you will not rage at me for going in secret where Oceanus runs deep." I'll stop reading here, and this was a long quote if you want to think of it that way. But I just wanted you to, if you feel like you can go over it once again, or you can get a text. I'll post it on Classroom. So this is the kind of text from which we are trying to derive any kind of cosmology or cosmogony from Homer. And you can imagine how difficult that is. I mean, how impossible that is. In fact, this is the text where we have most of the things. We have Oceanus, ocean, Okeanos in Greek, who at one point is claimed to be, the begetter of all, the origin of all, the father of all. But of all what? Of all gods, of all living things. Tethys, the mother, who is just mentioned, and the idea that Tethys and Oceanus are estranged. So there is a small mention of that. Then you have, the mention of sleep and night. And night is also called, all subduing, mistress of gods and men. And now how far are we going to take this? Are we going to think of night as some kind of an originary god or goddess, or rather just someone who, even gods sleep, so, just more of a conceptual idea of somebody who subdues them in the sense that she can put them to sleep, except then Hypnos says that, well, not Zeus, because, once I tried, he tried to hurl me out and throw me to the bottom of the ocean. And again, the idea of, okay, bottom of the ocean. So you start forming an idea of also the idea of how the universe was structured, how they imagined the cosmos to be structured. And I'll not read more passages from this, actually. Rather, I'll try and explain what can be derived from these passages and what kind of cosmogony, if you're just looking for cosmogony. As I said, it's pretty difficult, and it's pretty difficult to even know that. Is there even, because it's more of an acceptance. It's the idea is that we already know, we have a picture of the world, and so what we are trying to do is, reverse engineer. We're trying to reconstruct the picture of the world from these passing comments about Tethys and Oceanus and night and, distance, how far, so what lies beneath the ocean, for example, the idea of that. So all these ideas then, all these different passages, as you can see, and there's a narrative going. So when you read the Iliad, or when I first read the Iliad, when I was pretty young, I was like 11 at that time, and I remember I did not sort of catch most of this. This is all subliminal. It goes into it goes in there, but what you're following is the story, the narrative. Okay, this battle is going on. Oh, will Zeus fall for Hera's deception or not? And what about Hypnos? So you're following, the narrative of the characters. Well, most people are. People read differently, of course, and the first reading is always different from the second and third. And if you read with a purpose, then you'll find different things to read. So if you read trying to find cosmogony, then you'll find different things in there. Versus if you're just reading to know what happened next, which most of us are, then you would focus on different elements. It's a rich text, and it sort of it calls for rereading and rereading if you're interested in the time and the culture and and the story. The story itself is great. So. I'll put this aside, so don't worry, I'm not going to read out long passages again. What kind of cosmogony, what kind of an idea of the world can we get from Homer, if at all? So, some things that, and this is not my work, it is from, our textbook, which is Kirk, Raven, Schofield, the Pre-Socratic Philosophers. And they have done a very good job of putting, putting together the more cosmological sort of notions in the pre-philosophical cosmogonies. So, the sky, first of all. So the sky is a solid hemisphere, right? It's like the idea that we get from the Iliad is that the sky is a solid hemisphere shaped like a bowl, and this bowl will come back in other forms as well. So this idea of this hemisphere, and epithets, used for the sky are things like chalkeon, polychalcon, siderion. Chalkeon means something like copper or bronze. The idea of something brazen, right? Very brazen, very, very, very coppery, bronzy, so metallic. Siderion, which means something made of iron or steel, so like something sort of, again, shiny. So the idea is that it is something that is solid, it's something that is bright, and it's bowl-like. And you can imagine, sitting here and looking at the sky, it looks like a hemisphere that covers us. I'm looking outside at the sky, which obviously you can't see, but you can see in your own rooms. So the idea of it being like a hemisphere that covers, and it's bright, right? Whether you look at it in the day or night, at night it's maybe bright in a different way. You have the stars and you have the moon. In the daytime it's bright in a different way. So you have the idea of this solid and bright hemisphere that covers the Earth, right? And what does it cover? So the idea was that it's a round, flat Earth that it covers. Now, flat because when you look at the Earth, it seems flat. I'm just sort of trying to explain it via immediate observation. So if you look at what kind of idea we'd get of the world through immediate observation tells us that the world is flat. Why round? Because if the horizon, if you look at the horizon, it has a roundness, So the idea that it's flat and it's round, and there is a big hemisphere covering it. So those were the original ideas that we can find. Then, what's above? Okay, let's start with what's above. So the idea was that in between that top of the hemisphere and the flat Earth, the lower part is covered by something called air, which translates more like a dark mist, right? So the idea was that it's covered by some kind of a dark mist, which of course clears and moves. So that's the lower part, and it contains the clouds. So the clouds and air are the lower part. And above that, you have the aether, right? And this aether is something that is, that is fiery. And this whole sort of sky is Uranos, right? So the upper part is the Uranos, aether, which is fiery, and that's why bright. And the lower part is air, which is misty and dark. So, the idea of invisible air, in fact, is also something that you will see, for example, in Anaximenes, and it makes it slightly more, it takes a slightly more scientific thinking. Because at that time, it was like an empty space filled with this dark mist which clears and empties. And then you have above, you have the Uranos, which is bright and fiery, and that's why you have this brightness. And in fact, day and night could also be explained in this way if you want to think about it naturalistically as, air clearing, and then you can see the bright aether that seeps in, or not. But that's something that Anaximander does. We'll get into that as well. We're not doing this in Homer yet. In Homer, there is no naturalistic systematization. It's pretty difficult, that's why, to reconstruct. As I said, you saw that passage that I read. It's difficult to reconstruct from merely that passage, what's going on. So then what is there below the surface? As you noticed, Hypnos, he was threatened with being thrown to the depths of the ocean, the depths of something, right? So the idea that below the surface, more or less the idea is that the Earth stretches as far downwards as it stretches upwards. Except downwards, we don't know whether it's a hemisphere or not. It's not very clear. The idea is not hemispherical per se. So the top part is hemispherical, but below, you have the idea is that the Earth stretches downwards, and it has this. You have Hades below, of course, the Earth, and equal distance, as far up as the sky is, at that same distance below is Tartarus. Tartarus is, the lowest part of the underworld where all the sort of, spirits of Tartarus, which we don't want them to escape into our world, live. And it is closed again with this iron gate. So it's firm, unyielding, also bright, I suppose. And so you have this top and the bottom now reconstructed. And for example, in Xenophanes later, he would say that it stretches indefinitely under. So, no Tartarus in that sense. But in Homer, you will have this. So you have Tartarus, which is below, closed with these strong iron gates so that, these creatures don't escape from below. And around the earth, you have Okeanos. And this Okeanos is again, the idea is that it could be a kind of river that surrounds the earth, it's source of water. And we saw in that passage that we read, it's the idea of, is the origin of all living things. Again, this water as origin, and we'll come back to this water as origin later on. And why does it surround? Because if you think about the Mediterranean region where these myths sort of originally originated, you can try and reconstruct where this might have originated, where they looked all around and everywhere was water. But the tricky part, and this is a discussion that you'll find in Kirk and Raven as well, is that it's fresh water, not salt water, right? So where would that fresh water belief come from? So these are things to be wondered about and interpreted further. And I found a very interesting etymology, which might be of interest to you, is the idea of Okeanos as lying around could have an etymological sort of base in this Vedic Sanskrit word from the Rig Veda, which is Shayana. So it's sort of Shayan, which we have even in modern sort of Sanskrit and in Hindi. It's sleep, right? Lying. So Shayan is what lies around, which lies all around. So Shayan, and then your English ocean sounds pretty close to it actually. So the idea of what sort of lies around everywhere, and within which, it's sort of around the edge of the earth. I'll try and make a diagram and share it with you. So here, let's see. So it's sort of, around the edge of the earth. Earth is a disk, remember, a flat disk. Around the edge, you have this Okeanos. And below, you have Hades and you have Tartarus. And above, you have air and ether and the edge of the hemisphere. And in fact, you have Mount Olympus that goes up in there, so that sort of complicates the hemisphere a bit, but you get more or less the idea of what's going on. So now, what is this Okeanos or the river or the ocean? It's the idea is that it's something that surrounds the earth, and round the whole earth, around the shield's outer rim, it flows as well. So it's not sitting. So even though the idea is lying around, it's not sitting there. It's quiet, but it's still flowing throughout. So the idea is it's a flowing water, and it's the source of all water. So ex hu perpantes potamoi kai pasa thalasa kai pasa krenai kai freyata makra nausin, sorry for the Greek, from whom indeed all rivers and all sea and all springs and deep wells flow. Right? And one of the epithets used there is apsoros, which is backflowing, right? The idea that it is flowing back into itself, which also gives us an idea of circularity. Right? It's a circular surrounding Okeanos, which is the source of all waters, whether fresh or salt water, and that's interesting. And in Kirk and Raven, sort of one of the arguments given is that it is salt water in the sense that the idea that salt water could be formed from fresh water mixing with earth in some way, right? So the idea that all original water is the source, the spring is fresh water, which then forms different kinds of waters. And it's a source, as you can see, of all rivers, of the sea, of all seas, so they're different seas, that is. So remember, ocean and sea, two different things. So the ocean is the surrounding thing, and you have seas inside. And springs, which is freshwater springs, natural springs, and wells, which are artificial or man-made, human-made wells. So it's a source of all of these. And but even in Homer, like you have the idea of this circular okeanos which surrounds, but you also have the idea of this broad outer sea, right? That sort of infinite, indefinite, and this infinite, indefinite we'll come back to when we'll come to when we get to the philosophers. So the question is, what here is based on observation, what is not? So we can say that the sky, hemispherical, as we already discussed, solid, bright. It could look solid. It doesn't look very solid to me, but I can imagine that there being a consensus that it is solid and bright. But it probably doesn't look solid to me because of modern, because of being taught modern cosmology since my childhood, which means that I cannot imagine it being an enclosed space. I think of it as open. But at that time, the stars as well, they seem to be in the same place. Think about it. At night especially, day sky, it's trickier, but at night especially, those stars sort of, revolved around and came back, and they didn't seem to move further off or further in. And it was thought that they were at the limit, so they were at the hemisphere that you have all these stars. There may be some kind of an opening, or I don't know. So the sky could be based on observation. As we also argued, Earth could be flat. But ocean, freshwater, it's a bit trickier. So we have to consider Greek geography and think of what kind of geography. And in fact, it helps us also think of what other beliefs might have come in. So maybe this freshwater idea might have been imported or traveled with somebody like one group of people that sort of gave the idea that we have fresh water surrounding. Then there is this idea of the bowl in the sense of like the sun. So the idea is the sun, one of the myths, is that the sun sort of after crossing the sky, the sun is on the horse, with the chariot with all these 7 horses, the 7 horses of the rainbow. So after crossing the sky, sails when it ends. So one of the ideas is that goes down into the ocean, sleeps, I don't know, is recreated again. We'll see that in Heraclitus. But here the idea is that the sun then sort of gets to the other end of the ocean, sits in the ocean in a golden bowl, and goes down the stream and arrives back in the east, just before dawn, to sort of go out again. Now the bowl, there the hemisphere bowl is what we observe, but why the bowl for the sun? If the sun is a person, why does the sun need a bowl? So you can already see, they might have sublated, if you're using the Hegelian term still, the sort of the natural, the sun, the roundish sun, into an anthropomorphic deity with chariots and everything. But the idea of the bowl remains, which means that there's still you need a round-shaped vessel for the sun to travel. So you see, like the natural, the anthropomorphic, the animistic, it's not a very clear-cut division that you can make at any point, but you can see the effect of sublation in the myth. Now, another question of okeanos, ocean, being seen as the begetter of all, the father of all, as in that passage that I read, ocean and Tethys. So why, right? Now this is where philosophy will start sort of entering. So when Plato mentions this in Theaetetus, he says, Okeanos, begetter of gods and mother Tethys, declared all things. To be offspring of flux and motion, right? Now, so what Plato is doing here is saying that, because water is constantly moving and constantly shifting, so he's trying to find a conceptual element in the myth, right? He's trying to find a conceptual element in the myth and saying that this might be the origin of Heraclitean belief that everything was flux and motion. If you think of Okeanos as being the beginning of everything, then you would think of flux and motion as being the beginning of everything. But already with Plato, you can see that he's trying to do a philosophical systematization, which in Homer you don't have, right? Homer, you won't find a passage in Homer where he says that because the origin of everything is flux and motion, and the whole world is in constant flux. That is why let us choose, the thing that constantly moves, Okeanos, ocean. Look, it's constantly moving. So why not have Okeanos as the origin of things? So the thing with philosophy is, and even early philosophy, and that's what we too tend to do, by the way, so in that sense we have not, gone too far away from Plato, is that we try and imbue philosophical meaning to myths often enough, and try and make this a kind of like a big philosophical, cosmogonical sort of connection, which, as I said already, is not that easy to do with Homer. So one other thing that Kirk and Raven talk about, and I'll also mention very, very briefly actually, is the Orphic cosmogonies. Now, who were the Orphics? Now, you might have heard of Orpheus, so you have heard of Orpheus and Eurydice. Who was this musician, who played the lyre, and at his wedding, his wife got bit by a serpent, and she went into the underworld, and he decided to follow her and get her back, and it was a failed venture. Because he was told, don't turn back, just believe in the gods. Again, there's this thing of like, just believe in the gods and believe that she's following you. But he sort of, did not trust this entirely, turned back, and then, and lost. Now, why Orpheus is a completely different question. We'll not get into that. But there was a cult of Apollo the Purifier, right, with certain, reincarnation beliefs of that time, which combined together to form this, alternate other religion, other than the Homeric religion, called the people were called the Orphikoi, and often Bacchant. That's the French pronunciation, backhands, I don't know. They were sort of brought together in this, these two beliefs, that is, were brought together in this idea that if we have a way of purifying the soul, the purification of the soul, then it would survive, and it would become part of like the sort of the idea of a world soul that comes with Pythagoras later on. But it would survive, it would reincarnate into new beings, and this is a belief that that would keep coming up, and in fact you have that in Plato as well. In fact, so Orpheus, who was, this kind of a pure figure, was a musician, was also a prophet, became a sort of patron saint of, rites and these ritual. This was again, one of the mysteries, the sort of ritual ways of, like mysteries of life and death. And these people, and life and death is really important here, because these people were believers in reincarnation. So it was an idea of reincarnation that sort of came in. And we will talk about the Orphikoi again briefly when we talk about Pythagoras and the Pythagorean sort of beliefs. But they too constructed certain cosmogonies which were part of the common cosmogonies that we had at that time. Apart from Homer. So they tried to do a systematization of a sort, which is different from Hesiod. Hesiod was before, these people continued till after. But, the type of systematization that we had where, and before, after is pretty difficult out here, so, don't take me at my word, is that the idea of there being a kind of god, Phanes, who was a kind of bi-gendered god, self-fertilizing, who gave birth to the first generation of gods. And this god himself would have come from, Kronos. Kronos would also have broken up into Aether and Chaos, and from Chaos and Aether would have come, and this idea of an egg. So, if you look at Kirk and Raven, there is a long discussion of the egg, and I'm not going to go into that. But the idea of there being an egg which breaks into two. One of the myths is that the top part of the egg became Uranos, and the bottom part Earth. But then again, if Uranos existed before, So the problem is that if this is a folk religion and folk beliefs and different people have different ideas, it's just very chaotic in that sense. It's very confusing, chaotic in the modern sense. It's very confusing, and one cannot understand how to put together, a proper theogony from these beliefs in the same way as we could not do it via Homer. I mean, we could create a nice narrative, but it's very confusing. Who is the origin? Is it Okeanos and Tethys who are? But like, how did it come about? How did Zeus come about from Okeanos and Tethys in that case? So we don't really know. And same with if you look at the common religions, including the Orphics. So we have it's more interesting to look at the beliefs of reincarnation and the rites and rituals, which is a different question, than to try and figure out a theogony from their beliefs, because there are other versions in which they have a bit more of a materialistic theogony, in which you have a kind of matter, hyle, from which you have Hudor and Ge, which is water and earth. From water and earth, you have time and necessity, and from that you have, and I'll share these sort of sections from the book with you. You have Aether, Chaos, Erebos, and then from that you have an egg which comes up. It's just extremely confusing. If you followed anything of what I said, I mean, I'm not sure I could sort of repeat it without having these notes in front of me. Is that it's almost impossible to find a systematic account of ancient theogony or cosmogony from these religions. So Hesiod, who was flourished in 7th century BC, and we don't really know. I mean, we are giving him like a whole centuries time of approximation that between 750 to 650 BC, he flourished from Boeotia, and he's more from a kind of rural, like, not that any place was extremely urban at that time, but they were urban and rural centers, and he attempted a systematization of ancient myths. So this is something that we'll discuss in the next video. What was the effect of Hesiod's cosmogony, Hesiod's theogony in forming these proto-philosophical beliefs? What element did it have in, and how does it help us understand, the history of science or the history of philosophy better? So yeah, thank you.